Hello, everybody. Hello, Cecil. Thank you
Hey,
all for joining us here today. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. We really appreciate you taking that time to spend it with us here today. Who are we? My name is Jamie Singleton. I am a program manager here at Microsoft for the .NET community, and I'm joined with my good friend Cecil.
hey everyone. I was just taking a look in the chat and I'm seeing we have people from all over joining us today. Canada, Quebec, the Philippines, Moscow, like all over. So
Siberia, this is amazing.
yeah, it's awesome. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Jamie, why don't we tell folks what are we doing here?
Sure. So today we're here to cover learning all about web APIs with ASP.NET Core. We're going to go into what web APIs are, what .NET is, ASP.NET, and how you can use them in your everyday life and why they're important.
Right. And so if you head over to the website, which is letslearn.net/web API, the entire agenda is there. So you can see exactly what we're going to cover today. We're going to go through some modules using Microsoft Learn. And so the first module, we're really going to talk about what APIs are. We're going to talk about consuming APIs. What are some of the use cases that we have for them? And then in the second half of it, we're going to talk about actually building the web APIs using .NET. So then we're going to use the .NET templates. We're going to use Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to do it all on a Mac because we can do that now because .NET is open source and it runs everywhere.
Amazing. Um, so, so tell us a little bit, Cecil, like, what is .NET? What are APIs? Why do they matter? Why do I care?
Sure. So let's start with what is .NET, right? And for me, .NET is a platform that allows us to write any type of application that we want, right? So if you talk about writing mobile apps, desktop apps, web APIs, even if you want to write microservices, right? .NET gives us the flexibility to write any type of application using tools like Visual Studio, C Sharp, F Sharp, Visual Basic. And it's for me, it's just like a great experience that I could use the knowledge that I have across these different platforms. Now, when we talk about web APIs, and we'll dive a little bit into this as we get into the workshop, but web APIs are essentially a way that we could communicate with different services across the internet. And so we're going to really dive in to see how ASP.NET Core really gives us like a really good programming interface over creating these types of things. So why don't we start off with talking about let's go to this fundamental section that we have up here. And let's take a look at some of the things that we're going to actually need to start building these APIs. Now, the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to install .NET. So usually what I want to do is I'll head over to .NET/download, right? And here I can just hit like the download link and I can download a version of .NET that will live on my machine. Now you see here we have two versions that are highlighted, right? There's the .NET 5.0, which is the one that I'm going to be using today, but there's also .NET 3.1. And you can notice that one says it's LTS. So LTS actually stands for long-term support. So this means that this is going to be supported for a pretty long time versus like the .NET 5.1. Well, this one is going to be supported not as long, but whenever the next version of .NET, gets released, then we're going to hopefully, push you all to upgrade to that one as well. Now, you can notice here at the top too, it automatically selects my operating system, right? So I'm on Mac OS. But again, if you're on Windows, if you're on Linux, or even if you want to run .NET in a Docker container, you have the option to use any one of these that you want. So I already have .NET installed on my machine, so I'm not going to install it. But if any of you that are following along with us, please go ahead. You can click download. It's not a very long download at all. It's like click, OK, and it installs the SDK, it installs the compilers, and a lot of the tools that you need for us to get started today. Now, the other thing that we're going to need to install to get started, we're going to need Visual Studio Code, or sometimes we call it VS Code. And so when I look that up really quickly, again, just like before, right? Like I can download a version of VS Code and it runs on Linux, it runs on Mac, runs on Windows. Again, everything that we're going to show you today is going to be able to run across different operating systems. And using VS Code and .NET, regardless of whatever operating system you're on, you're going to be able to have that same experience across the board, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to use these sets of tools. Now, I already have VS Code installed on my machine, but what I did want to show you is some of the extensions that I have installed already that are going to make this a little bit easier for us as we build our applications. So if I head over to the extensions section, first thing I want to do is look for C Sharp. And the first option that you're going to see here is C# for VS Code or C# for Visual Studio Code. Now, I already have this installed, but again, you can go ahead and you can hit the install button. And this will give you, some of the tooling and the debugging support inside of VS Code that you're going to need to do that. The other tool that I have installed is called the REST client. We may use this, we may not, but it's another great tool that I like to use whenever I'm building web APIs. It allows me within VS Code to be able to make requests and look at my HTTP requests and responses, so I can test it out in the same space without having to jump around too much. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm gonna guess that makes sense. All right, now after we have those things installed, the next thing that we're going to want to do is, let's see. Yeah, those are everything that we're going to need. So why don't we start off and head over to the workshop and see what we're going to do. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to close these windows because we don't really need them anymore. And let's take a look at our agenda, right? So let's start off with the first part of the workshop. And this one is actually hosted on Microsoft Learn. And this one's called Explore the Art of the World by Using RESTful APIs. So let's go ahead and kick it off. And so here you can see some of the learning objectives we have. So we're going to learn about RESTful APIs. We're going to learn some of the strategies to connect to external web APIs. We're also going to talk about querying web APIs. And we're going to see a couple examples too. So let's go ahead and kick off this first one. Now, in this first section of this Learn module, my buddy Burke down here has a really cool video that he goes into depth about what exactly are web APIs. And he actually says here in this section, he thinks of web APIs as like a kitchen sink. So he thinks that, the kitchen sink is the API between you and like the pipes, right? And the pipes are the thing that supply the water to you. Me, I kind of think as web APIs as like the interface into the world, right? So if a web page, for instance, is the window to the world, web APIs are kind of like the road that we run on, if that kind of makes sense as an analogy. But let me actually head over to some slides and I'll give you a little bit of a better example. So when I think about web APIs, I think about let's separate those two terms. We have the web part, and then we also have the API part, right? And when we think about the web, we usually think about how we can communicate with each other back and forth over the internet. We think about things like web browsers and HTTP and, the ability for us to, search for things online and those types of things. When we think about APIs, now we're thinking about, contracts of programming languages that allow us to, run certain operations on machines, whether they're local or remote. And APIs actually stand for Application Programming Interface. And there's a lot of different types of APIs that exist on your machine. And when you put those together and you get web and APIs, those are really just APIs that you could use, operations that you can invoke on a machine, whether it's local or remote, and you can use that inside of your applications to create some really interesting experiences. Now, if you're building different types of apps like mobile apps with Xamarin, maybe desktop apps with UWP, games, web applications, or even web APIs as well, all of these can make use of web APIs to create a really interesting experience. You can imagine you're doing something like, looking up product information or storing contacts. Or if you're having a game, maybe you have like a leaderboard situation where you're trying to see who has like the highest score, right? Web APIs are a great opportunity for you to be able to pull in some of this information into your app and make use of some of those external services. Now, some examples of web APIs inside of the Microsoft ecosystem are like Microsoft Graph, for example, which is a really big API that gives us a lot of information about what's happening inside of like my Microsoft 365 account. Also, we have Azure DevOps has an API too. So if I want to know about what's happening with my builds, what's happening, with my check-ins or my CI/CD pipeline, I could use the API to bring in some of that information. Also, we have Cognitive Services, which adds machine learning. We have PlayFab, which is an API that you could use for gaming type scenarios. All of these are really just great examples of how you could bring these APIs inside of your application. Now, let's take a look. Let's go forward a little bit and let's head over to the next module. I'm not going to read through a lot of these because I believe you could read these through yourself. It'll be pretty boring to have me do that. So I'm going to go ahead and take a step forward really quickly. Now, in this first part, it really wants us to start building an API. So if you take a look here in this first section, I'm going to zoom into this a little bit so y'all can see it better. it actually wants you to use Node.js and install this thing called a JSON server. And using that server, it wants you to point to this some file that's right here, and it's going to use that to bootstrap an API for you really quickly. Now, since this is a .NET event, like I'm not going to write it in JavaScript, but I am going to go ahead and create one in .NET that we could start using. And then as we go down a little bit, it talks about like how you can use that API that they just built to issue various types of queries. So for instance, if we enter a particular URL that says objects here, for instance, we should see it return a lot of those different types and a lot of that different information that was coming back from that thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to head over to VS Code, and I actually went ahead, and I'm going to close some of these things because you don't need to see them. But I actually went ahead and created some of the that endpoint for you. So I'm going to go ahead and run it with a .NET run. Right. And now I'm going to actually copy that URL. Notice it says localhost 3000, just like it did in that Learn module. And I'm going to paste this in my browser. And I want us to take a look and see what exactly we're getting back. So I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to paste this in. Oops, that's not what it's supposed to be like. Oh, haha, I forgot something. See, and this is a good example too of why you shouldn't copy and paste. All right, so when I hit objects, what it's doing is returning to me that response back from my API. Now, if I open some of these little objects that are inside of here, you can see some of that data, like, some museum information is what this looks like. There's some dates in here and so on and so forth. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, why does this look like this in Cecil's browser and it doesn't look like this in my browser? Well, I'm actually using an extension. I'm a big fan of using extensions because it makes that development experience a little bit better. And the extension that I'm using, I'll show you what this is called, is actually called the JSON Beautifier and Editor. So what happens is that whenever I make requests or whenever there's a web thing that returns JSON, it's not going to look like a big wall of text. It's going to give me that nicer experience that I can navigate through. So this is just the one that I like to use. You might have a different one that you use, but one good way to just search for them is to head over to that extension section. You can click on Get Extensions, and then usually you could just search for JSON, right? And then you could see there's tons of options here, and you could just pick the one that you like. This one just happens to be the one that I like. But what you're seeing here so far is that I've just made a request to an API, right? And that API has returned to me some information about the data that it holds. So you want to think about APIs as an interface into your ability to use certain resources. So in this case, the resources that this one is containing is information about a museum. So you're saying, hey, I want to be able to get that information, right? If you think about some other operations you might want to carry out, you might want to do like a create, read, update, or even delete some of those resources. And we'll see as we go on some options for us to be able to do that. All right, so as we scroll down a little bit inside of this API, it's going to talk about things like API endpoints. So my API endpoint essentially is like the address of where my API lives. Because if you think about it, APIs live on the web, or it exists on some HTTP thing. And so we need to know, well, how do I access that thing that I want to use? How do I get to that API? And how do I make a call to get the information that I really want to start working with? And that's where HTTP comes in. And HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And it's a protocol that allows us to communicate with APIs or web servers. And it doesn't matter whether they're local or remote, but it allows us to be able to share information between each other in a very uniform way, which I think is pretty cool. I'm going to head back over to the slides here really quickly. And I want to talk to you about how HTTP allows us to flow information back and forth between two places. So imagine like Jamie, my friend that's here with me, wants to find out some information about some shows that are happening on Channel 9, right? She might decide that, hey, she's going to go over to her web browser. She's going to type in channel9.msdn.com. And then her web browser is going to make a request over to that endpoint. So that endpoint, again, being https://channel9.msdn.com, is going to generate that HTTP request, which is going to get sent over to some server that exists somewhere. Now, those servers, their job is to receive that request, process it, and carry out whatever operation that they need to carry out. They're going to generate a response and send it back over to that browser, right? And that browser essentially is going to take that information and turn it into something useful that the user can consume. We usually call this a request response model, right? Or a client server model as well, where your browser is acting as the client and the server, well, the server is acting as a server, right? And their job is to process requests that come in. Now, here's an example of a URL, right? And we spoke about, our APIs need to have an address. I need to know how exactly I could reach my API. So URLs are essentially like the address, right? Like, how do I reach this API? And URLs are broken up into a couple different parts. So first is the scheme, and the scheme lets us know, well, what type of protocol am I actually using? In this case, you can see that we're using HTTP, but it could be anything else like FTP or something different. But for web APIs, we're probably going to be using HTTP. Then the next part of our URL is going to be the host name. And the host name lets us know, well, what is the domain that this thing lives at? And here in our example, ours is graph.microsoft.com. And then the last part of that is the resource, right? What's the thing within this domain that I'm trying to get at? And in this case, I'm trying to get at my information, which is why it's a /v1/me, right? I want to know about my stuff. So if we kind of read this API left to right, it's saying, I want to make a HTTP request to Microsoft Graph to get information back about me, right? And so now, using things like HTTP methods like put and post and, generating requests, we can send them, we can send requests to this API, and then we can get some information back, usually in JSON, or some people like to use it in XML format, that we can start integrating inside of our applications. All right, so let's take a look back at this API that would have been created. Hopefully some of you may or may not have gone ahead and tried that out, that little Node.js example out, and taken a look at these. Now, one of the things that you see it allows us to do here, notice it's saying that the method we use whenever we made that request is that HTTP GET. Now, inside of web APIs or inside of HTTP, there's a lot of different HTTP methods that we can make use of. So for instance, you might have heard of, HTTP put or post, you might have heard of delete or even using patch. Now, whenever we're building APIs, depending on the type of operations that we're doing, we can use those and map them to certain HTTP request methods or HTTP verbs. Some folks call them HTTP verbs to carry out those various operations. Now, by default in our browser, if I go ahead and just paste something in the browser, it's just going to do an HTTP GET. It's going to say, hey, get me the thing that's coming from this place, right? Which is essentially what we did. But what if we wanted to do some other things? Like what if I wanted to create an object or delete an object, right? And we can map those to those types of HTTP methods that I spoke about earlier. So let's keep on going. Actually, it's test time. I think it's time to test Jamie. I hope she's been listening to me. I don't know if she's still here or not.
It's like, oh, is it time now? Okay.
It's quiz time. It's quiz time. So
I have been paying attention, I swear.
I hope you have. And so what we're going to do every now and again within the chat, within the stream, we're going to do these little pop quizzes and make sure that you're paying attention and not like watching YouTube or something like that. All
Even though this is
so
streaming.
First one. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So first question is, if the API is a sink, which of these statements are true? Is it the first one that says data is a faucet? Is the data a drain? Or is the data in the pipes?
I'm going to go with C, the data's in the pipes.
Data's in the pipes. Okay, we're going to see. We're not going to find out until we do all of them. So
that's harder. Okay.
All right. API stands for what? Is it Application Programming Intelligence, Application Programming Interface, Auto Project Interface, Amazing Programming Intellectual? Wow. I know
I'm
what
going
it
to go with Application Programming Interface.
Okay. Application Programming Interface. Are you sure? Are you really, really sure? No pressure. I'm just asking. No? Okay. All right. Let's do the second one. It's necessary to understand the entire architecture of an application to use its API. So do you think that's true? I don't know if we really talked about that, but let me know if you think that's true or not. Jamie, I can't hear you. I don't know why, but
oops, my microphone got muted. I said I'm going to go with false.
False. You got to go with false. All right. So I hope all of you in the chat are going to check it out. Let us know what you think. I'm gonna hit check answers, and if Jamie's right, then we should like.
I want to see all your answers in the chat. Let's see
Yeah,
if you
let us know
guys
what you all
are
think.
paying more
Hopefully,
attention than me.
right. Hopefully, y'all are following along too and trying this stuff out. All right, so I'm gonna do check answers, and looks like you got all of them right.
Yay! Told you I was paying attention.
I hope you didn't I hope you didn't cheat and do this before. I know
No,
we
I
prepped
swear.
this. Okay, I'm just saying.
No, I
All
swear.
right.
Everybody who got
you.
it in the chat, amazing.
I believe you. Oh, so it looks like it went ahead and moved me forward to the next one. Oh, I didn't know it did that.
Well, before we keep going, I have a couple questions, Cecil.
Sure.
What is the difference between like REST and Web API?
REST and Web API. I wouldn't say that there's a difference. So Web APIs are really, like I mentioned, that mechanism that allows us to communicate over the internet. Using like those HTTP verbs, put, post, delete, and so on. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. REST is a set of conventions for building web APIs. So they're not different, but I would say REST is very complementary to it. So when you talk about like a particular architectural style, you know what I mean? Like what are the types of conventions we use? What are some of the expectations that you have whenever you make requests and receive responses? That's kind of what REST kind of does. It gives us rules that we need to follow. Now, what you'll find is, some folks follow rules more than the other ones. And you'll probably also hear folks talk about like the RESTful maturity model, right? Like how RESTful is your API and things of that nature. Now, we're not going to get into that debate here today, but I mean, I'm talking to you about it because it might be something that you see as you're starting to, search around on Google or Bing or something like that and looking up information about REST. So again, today we're really going to focus on just building APIs, and we're going to use some conventions, but I definitely wouldn't be telling you, hey, well, this is a super RESTful API that we're building today.
Great. Thank you for that explanation.
Sure.
We have a few questions in the chat. Are you ready to take a few questions?
Yeah, we can take a few questions right now.
Amazing. So we did get one of them answered already. Next question I have from our StreamYard is Web API versus gRPC.
Web API versus gRPC. Okay, I'm guessing they want me to tell them what the difference is. All right, so Web API is more of a open protocol, so to speak. So Web API essentially is really just us using HTTP to carry out certain types of requests, right? And Web API is very much of a, I'm trying to find a good way to put it. All right, so gRPC is more of like a remote procedure call, RPC style of thing, right? So whenever we make requests, for instance, with gRPC, it always uses like binary versus, Web APIs are just plain HTTP. It sends information over in text. gRPC uses HTTP2 by default. I don't think you can go any lower than HTTP2 when you're using gRPC. For web APIs or just regular HTTP requests, you can use HTTP 1.0, you can use HTTP 2.0. I believe HTTP 3 is also on the way too. So, when you think about like backward compatibility, that's something you might want to consider as well. Today, browsers have much better support for HTTP APIs versus using gRPC. So when it comes to, maybe you want to build like a JavaScript thing, or you want to build, something, I don't know, using Blazor or something like that. There's much better support for just making regular web requests than, using something like gRPC. The other thing I would tell you about gRPC, it's because it is binary, it is a little bit more performant. It's a little bit faster. And then we have that, well-defined contract up front. So about like the different operations that you can call and the things that you could do with it. So again, it's usually like a trade-off, right? Like, are you running on HTTP2? Are you building a browser app? How important is like that binary format performance worth to you? And then you can kind of, weigh those pros and cons to kind of, see what makes the most sense for you. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And just for anybody out there, including myself, what does gRPC stand for?
I think it stands for, and I heard this name is like, the definition has changed like a couple of times, but I believe it stands for Google Remote Procedure Call. That's what the RPC stands for, and the G, because it originated out of Google. But I think they changed it to be something else, remote procedure call. I don't know what the new one is, but originally it was Google remote procedure call. Any more questions?
Yes, I do have a few questions. I'm playing around with my audio. I think I'm getting a little bit of echo, and I apologize in advance of that. So we have a few more questions, actually. From Satendra, what is the difference between Web API and microservices?
Web API and microservices. Okay, wow. You can use web APIs to build microservices. So I wouldn't say that there's a difference. It's just a matter of what tool you want to do to carry out the job. Now, microservices for me are just a selection of patterns that you could use to build, scalable distributed applications, right? If you think about scale, if you want to think about performance, if some of those things are really important to you, if the ability to be able to segment your entire application into very distinct pieces that are independently deployable and scalable, then that's essentially where microservices give you the benefit. But there's no difference. There's not like a versus kind of thing. You could use web APIs to build microservices, and I believe using things like HTTP and gRPC are very common when folks are doing that.
Amazing. And we will actually be going a little bit diving deeper into microservices next month at this event. So stay tuned for more information on that.
That's right. It's Microservice March next month, right?
Yes. So we'll be back here in a month to hang out with all of you again. I have a few more questions, though, on web APIs. So let's see. It's a lot of comparing. Okay, so next one is Godig okay, I'm gonna skip that one. Okay, so GraphQL versus Web API.
Sure. GraphQL versus Web API. So again, very similar. Like I mentioned before, GraphQL runs over HTTP, very similar to how Web APIs run over HTTP. GraphQL applies almost like a DSL or a particular format for how you make requests for information. So, for instance, the way that you query for data or do mutations or change data has a very specific syntax for you to do that. But at the end of the day, like they're all running on HTTP. Again, HTTP 1, HTTP 2. I would say with GraphQL, it gives you a little bit more power to give you the ability to query for the parts of the data that you care about, right? I'm trying to be very specific with how I explain it. So for instance, imagine we had this API that we just used, right? I'll switch over. Let me see. I'll paste this thing back in here really quickly. We can take a look at this. So with a regular web API, right? Like we'll just get this, right? We'll get the shape of the data. Like these are the things that the API returns. With GraphQL, it gives us the ability to specify, again, built into the protocol, what are the things that I want to retrieve? So what if I only wanted to receive like the item property? Or what if I wanted to receive item and artist and not receive this entire collection of properties per entity, right? Like GraphQL will allow me to do stuff like that. It'll allow me to like pick out the thing and shape the response in a way that I want it to, which again is not as easy to do with something just as like plain web APIs. But again, from the underlying protocol perspective, like it's still HTTP. You're still making put, post, get requests. You're still using like the infrastructure of the web to do that. It's just that again, GraphQL is like web APIs plus some extra stuff, right? Plus some extra conventions that make queryability a little bit more flexible from the client perspective. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if that doesn't make sense.
I did understand that. Feel free to put your questions in the chat if you need Cecil to explain further. We are taking your questions live. Speaking of, we have a question from Chris from Live TV. REST versus OData.
REST versus OData. Okay, I mean, it's the same thing like REST versus GraphQL, right? It's the same thing. I would say GraphQL and OData are two different formats or two different protocols that allow you to have that flexibility in terms of querying for information. So again, the GraphQL stuff looks, a certain way, and they have their way of doing things. And very similar, OData has its own way of doing things. One of the things I like about both of them is not only do they give you that control, like that ability to select the properties that I care about, but it also gives me the ability to, run it in every different programming language. So there's support across the board for like .NET, for Python, for Java, for JavaScript. And so it's they're both very open standards. OData is a little bit older, as you can imagine, than GraphQL is, but essentially they can serve some of the same, some of the same use cases, right? Like, how do I want to have my data returned to my client? Like, what's the shape that I actually want to do? Or how can I have a little bit more flexibility with the way that that information is queried? But again, it's not a HTTP versus GraphQL or HTTP versus OData. It's more so of a, like, I look at them as enhancements and not as like competitors, I suppose.
Okay. So then if I were to give you this question from Non, how would you compare SignalR to REST, Web API, or gRPC? What would you say?
Yeah, there sure are a lot of comparison questions, man. What's going on with y'all today?
I know.
Right, so SignalR. That's a good question, though. SignalR is different because SignalR is more of a real-time, like a real-time duplex pipe, right? And so that's to say, when you think about REST, we think about GraphQL and OData and all this types of stuff. Like, the requests usually originate from the client, right? Like, it's a request response type of thing, like I showed in that diagram a little while ago. So like the client is going to be like, hey, I want some stuff, and then the server is going to return that stuff. When it comes to SignalR, we have the ability to start that communication from either side. So, I could send notifications from the server first, and they could, establish that communication, or I could send, requests starting at the client first. Again, it's really just depending on like what you're trying to do. Also, too, SignalR uses, most of the time it'll use WebSockets, but it has like other things that it'll use as well. But, let's say we're using the WebSocket perspective, essentially it's just, it's sending frames back and forth over the wire. Which is very different from something like a GraphQL or OData or just plain HTTP, which we're usually selling JSON, and then the JSON is usually very human readable. So if I wanted to go on the wire and use something, some type of HTTP client or inspector or something like that, like I can actually look at it and see what's going back and forth over the wire.
Okay, so it has a better visual representation, arguably.
Yeah. Sure, it does. And then, like I said before, like it's duplex, right? So the communication can originate from any place and go both ways.
Gotcha. So it's dynamic. Amazing. So you ready? I have a few more questions for you.
Let's do one more question, and then we'll move on a little bit.
Okay. So, question from Machal. When should we use Web API?
All the time.
Maybe in comparison to other pieces of tech.
Sure. When should you use Web API? I would say, so one of the good things about using Web APIs is, one, you have services, or you have information that are on different machines, and they may exist, on premises in your infrastructure. They might exist somewhere else. But you want to be able to give folks access to your data, right? You want folks to be able to either query it or create it or manipulate it and work with it in some way. And HTTP is probably the most common protocol across all devices, right? If you think about IoT devices, you think about, your smartwatch or your tablets, your phones, all these types of things. All of them have support for HTTP in some way or the other. And so when you think about being able to have like a very widely accessible set of resources, like HTTP for me is just kind of the way to go when you want to do that type of stuff. Now, if you're talking internally, and let's say this is a network that you can control, an environment that you can control, it's a little bit internal, you might want to use some different things, right? So like we spoke about gRPC, for instance, you know what I mean? Like, if it's something internal, maybe you don't really care too much about like actually looking at what's on the wire, I could send things between my different services like really quickly. Or if you think about like databases, for instance, like databases, most databases don't use APIs, right? Like they use like sockets. So if I connect to like a MongoDB, like I'm connecting to a socket. If I connect to SQL Server or SQL Azure, I'm connecting to a socket, right? And so now that's, they have their reasons for doing that from a security perspective and from a performance perspective. But again, when it comes to like efficiently sharing information throughout a wide variety of clients, I think HTTP is usually the better way to go. And when we talk in HTTP, then we're going to be talking about creating web APIs with HTTP.
Got it.
Are we
Okay,
good?
so one more
Awesome.
question, and then we'll continue moving on to our next workshop.
Sure, let's do it.
So John from Learn TV wants to know, do you have any tips on securing REST API endpoints?
You know what I would tell you to do? So we're not going to talk too much about security. There is a little section that talks about security in the next page, I believe. But if we're going to jump the gun a little bit, if you head over to docs.microsoft.com/asp.net, we do have like a whole bunch of docs around, using things like ASP.NET Identity, using things like OAuth and JWT tokens. Because when you talk about security means a lot of different things to different people, right? And so it depends on what you mean by secure. It could mean, hey, do I want to secure like the connection, right? And then we talk about things like HTTPS. Do I want to secure it with like a username, right? Like an identity of a person, right? And then we could talk about things like ASP.NET Identity and JWT tokens and stuff like that. Are you talking about, do we want to secure the hardware that the thing is actually on? So again, security means a couple different things for folks, but I would tell you, definitely head over to our docs, and we should have like some pretty good guidance specifically about securing like the identity or access to a very specific API that you're building.
Excellent. Thank you for your tips.
Cool.
Yeah, and all of the resources for this event can be found at aka.ms/web API resources _web API resources right there. So if you need any links to the downloads or the documentation or even the Learn modules that we're walking through, feel free to head on over to that link, and all of the information and resources are provided for you. Don't forget about the Learn Challenge that we're doing as well. You complete these modules, you get points, you win challenges, you get prizes. It's amazing.
I like prizes.
Yeah, who doesn't like prizes? And you get to like walk through your Learn module, so you're kind of like growing your education as you're also getting points. It's a little bit gamified, so it's really fun. We just covered kind of getting started with web APIs. What are they? Why they're important, how they're useful. We did a bunch of comparisons. What do you have next for us, Cecil? What else are we going to talk about?
Well, why don't we talk about actually building these web APIs? Does that sound like a good idea?
That sounds great.
All right, so let's head back over to my screen really quickly. And what we'll do is we'll head over to the second part of the workshop, which is create a web API using ASP.NET Core. And again, hopefully y'all can follow along with us, and let us know too, like if there's anything that any feedback you have about these modules that we're going through. Now let's head over. I'm going to skip the introduction and let's kind of like just get to it. Now, these exercises in this part are going to be a little bit more hands-on, right? And so they're going to require us to start using the .NET CLI, and we're going to spend a little bit more time inside of Visual Studio Code. What you'll notice here too, this asks us to use something called a sandbox. I'm not going to use that, but you can if you wanted to. What I'm going to do instead is actually run the code on my machine, so you could see what it actually feels like from real developer perspective. But again, you don't have to, but that's just what I'm going to do. All right, so I'm going to kind of move that out of the way, and let's kind of walk through the first part, which is going to tell us how we could set up our environment. So so first, like I mentioned before, we're going to have .NET installed, so make sure you have it installed. And then once it's installed, we'll be able to do something like this. I'll be able to call a command, a .NET new web API. And essentially what that'll do is scaffold out a new web API project for us. So I think that'll be pretty cool. Why don't we try that? I'm going to copy this command. I'm going to head over to VS Code. Looks like I have stuff running. I'll stop my stuff from running. And what we'll do is I'll paste that in there. Now, I don't want this entire path. I just want the Contoso's path part. So I'm just going to do that. Right? So .NET New Web API, Contoso Pets. Right? And you see that shouldn't take too long. It's going to create my project for me. It's going to set it
I
up.
have a question, Cecil.
Yes.
Why did you delete that? Why do you only want the Contorso portion?
Why did I delete that? Because I'm already in a folder that I want this to be in. So what this command will do was it'll create an ASP.NET Learn folder, and then a source folder, and then Contoso Pets.api folder. So I don't need like 3 levels deep of folders. You know what I mean? I want it to be in the folder that I'm in right now. If you wanted it to create, this level deep of folders, that's totally fine. But I just wanted to use this like service level folder. So this last piece, this is going to be the actual, source or destination of where my code is going to live. If that makes sense.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, cool. All right. So now that we've created that, we have a new web API project. Now you'll notice that, and I've already opened that in VS Code, but you'll notice that we'll have a set of, folders and files and pretty much like a shape of a new project. Now, if you've never done ASP.NET before, if you've never done C# before, some of this stuff might look new to you, but we're going to take the second to kind of look through that as soon as I go back there. And then after that, we're going to call .NET Build. Now, if you're new to programming, what .NET Build does is it'll look at all the code that we've written so far. It'll compile it, right? Essentially, it just means that it's going to prepare it to be run, right? It's going to package it up. It's going to prepare it to be run. And then somewhere at the bottom, we're going to call the .NET command to actually execute that code that we just built. So we're going to create a new web API. We're going to build the project. Again, we're going to package it up and get it ready to go. And then we're going to actually run it. So let's go ahead and check that out and see what happens. All right, so like I mentioned before, I went ahead and I created that project. I'm going to go into it now. So it's Contoso Pets API. I'm going to open that in a new window really quickly. And you can see here on the right side, I'm going to bump this up a little bit so folks can see what's happening here, right? But you should have a folder structure that looks something like this. So I'll have a startup file. I'll have a program.cs file. You see something in here called controllers, for instance. I'll just say yes to that when that pops up. And then, you'll see this thing in here called a CS proj file. And again, we'll dive into these a little bit more as we go on. But for now, how about we just run it and see what happens when we run this web API? Now, there's 2 ways that we can run it. I can run it on the command line, which is what it's telling you to do. Oh, this window is super big. I need to zoom back up. It's telling you to run it on the command line. And the way that we'll do that is within the folder that you just created the project, I can do a .NET run, right? And in a second, it's going to build a project. It's going to start up a web server locally on a machine. And then now it's going to start hosting it on an address. Now, if you remember, we talked about addresses a little while ago when I showed you that example of Microsoft Graph, right? That's what we're going to put inside of our web browser to know where this thing lives. So if you look here in the window, you can see this one has an address of localhost 5001. So that just means that it's running here on my machine. I'm going to pop that in here. And, oh, I don't see anything. Well, that's not fun. Let's take a look and see how exactly can I see where my API lives. Now, if you take a look inside the controllers folder, you should have a single file in there called weather forecast controller. And if we take a look at this, you'll see there's some methods in here that let us know, okay, well, this thing is responsible for managing the requests and responses. So I'm going to guess that if I do something like the address / weather forecasts, hopefully it should load my API up. So let's try that and see what happens. There you go. So now I'm seeing data, right? Now we're getting somewhere. And if I open this, and I'll zoom into that really quickly, we can see that by default, that new web API template, creates an API, a weather API, and we could use that to look at some of these different, some of this data that it's returning for us. So that's pretty cool. Now, since I'm using .NET 5, there's another cool thing that we get by default that really helps out when we're testing our web APIs. And that's called the Swagger UI. And I'm going to do name of our thing /Swagger, right? Now, you might be wondering, hey, I thought we are building web APIs. Where did this UI thing come from? I haven't written any HTML or CSS to this point. So how is it that we have this thing showing to us? Well, if you're using .NET 5, so again, not .NET 3.1, but .NET 5 and above, by default, the web API templates come with this thing called Swashbuckle. And Swashbuckle adds support for this thing called the Swagger UI. And using the Swagger UI, I can start making requests to my API within this browser UI. So notice I can click this operation, right? Notice it's a get, right, for the HTTP get. I can hit try out, and I can even execute it, right? So this is actually my real API. Like this is the thing that we just built, but I'm executing it here inside of the browser. And I didn't have to do anything other than just create a new project. If you notice, I haven't written a single line of code yet, but we already have an API that's up and running, and we already have this UI that we could use to iterate on and test our APIs as we start to go forward. All right, so I'm going to close this. Excuse me. All right, well, let's head back and see what else it wants us to do. So you'll notice here in this third step here, it's wanting us to use a command called curl. Now, if you're on a Windows machine, you may or may not have this command. If you're using, some of you folks might be using Windows Subsystem for Linux or something of that nature, you may have this, but by default, you don't have this on Windows. So you might want to do something different. So when it comes to testing out our APIs, we're probably going to just rely on using that Swagger UI. We're not going to do too much in the command line for the rest of this workshop. And then here, as you scroll onto the bottom, you can see here, this is the same example of that stuff that we saw earlier. Now, let's take a step forward and talk about how we can add data to our API, because I think data is important. Now, I think about data as like the resources that our web API allows us to interact with, right? Because web APIs for me are all about resources. Like, what's the thing that I want to start, carrying out operations against? So what's the thing I want to manipulate? So before we go forward, let's look at a couple examples. Let's say, Jamie has a store, right? And, we have Jamie's store of awesome stuff. And, maybe she has different products in her store. But if she wanted to have an API that gave you access to those things in her store, well, she'd probably need to create a resource, right? She'd need to model a resource around her products. So, it'll be something like, her web address /API/products. But now we have to think about, well, what do those products actually look like? Do we have a price and a quantity? Do they have a color or a shape? Do they have size and weight? Like, what are the properties that are that are going to be important for people that are calling the API to use? And so that's essentially where our data is going to come from. Usually we're going to have data stored in memory. We're going to have it stored in a database somewhere on a file. Maybe even the data might be coming from another API that we're pulling in and, manipulating in some way for us to return, right? But however we do that, we need to figure out, well, what's the shape of the thing that we want to return? And so again, let's take a look and see how we're going to do some of this stuff. So the first command that it wants us to run, it wants us to do this make dir and touch product. So it pretty much wants us to create a product class, right? And then after we create this product class, it wants us to define the shape of the product that looks something like this. Okay. So as you can see, our product has an ID, which is of type integer. It has a name, and it also has a price. Now, another thing I want you to notice about this product is not only does it have a shape, but it's also using like these attributes. And if you're unfamiliar with like attributes in C#, it's almost like adding metadata, right? How can I add some information, additional information about like the things that are inside of my code? And this attribute is saying this particular property that's here is required. So it's needed, like we need to have it as we're doing stuff. Also here, notice the price. It says, well, the price can either be between like these two values, right? So it could be, 1 cent, or it could be $9,999.99, right? Like, so it could be one or the other. But using these attributes, it helps our code enforce what does it mean for our resource or our model to be valid, right? Because you can imagine, what if you had a product that had like a negative price? That probably wouldn't be valid, right? Like that wouldn't work out well for us, what I mean? Because now like our application is in an invalid state. So again, we want to use validation to give us some of these types of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'll hit this copy button that's on the UI. I'm going to head over to my API. I should probably stop it from running too, because I don't want to do that. And I'm going to hit the add button. And I'm going to add, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to right click on the folder. And notice I have this thing that says new class, right? So this is where it comes in helpful when we add those extensions that I spoke about a little bit earlier. Like those extensions would add some of these little, menu items and options for us inside of .NET, inside of our .NET projects. So I'm going to do new class or new C# class. Notice at the top now I need to give it a name. So I'm going to call it product. And now here you go, I have the product. It looks like it put it in the controllers folder. It actually doesn't matter what folder you put it in, but I definitely don't want it in there. And now I'm just going to paste in that code that we got from the other part. There you go. Right. So you can see here that we're using this product. Now, since we're using C#9, we actually have the option to use another type of class or another type of way to model our code. And that's actually called records. And it's something that I kind of wanted to show you all today. So I'm going to change this to use a record, and then I'm going to tell you why I changed it to use a record. But let me change this code for you first. Now, records are something that were introduced in C#9. So again, if you're using a version of C# that is lower than that, like you won't be able to use it. But one of the reasons I like using records is because it's like classes, but with some additional, some additional opinions applied to it. So for instance, out of the box, when you use records, you get things like, the ability to do comparison between two things without having to write it yourself. It overrides things like the hash code and equality. It does things like it makes your items immutable by default, which means when we talk about immutability, we think about, our code or our product not being able to change, without us knowing about it, right? Like us having some control over that. So anyway, I like using records, particularly for returning API responses, because I feel like, it gives me a little bit more control, a little bit more flexibility over the things that I'm returning. Now, what else are we going to do next? So we have the product, right? And then coming down, I think we need to add like some database stuff, right? Yeah, we do. So in this next section, we're going to add entity framework. Now, if you're unfamiliar with entity framework, it is one of our data accessing classes or data accessing libraries that we have in .NET. It really gives us a good programming model over querying databases, querying for records or tables or data using a very C# way. So instead of me writing like SQL or writing, something in a very database specific language, I could use entity framework and I could use, loop statements, and I could use conditionals, and I could use classes, and being able to get the information back in a way that's easier for me to use. So I'm going to go ahead and add this package to our project. I'm going to copy this. And back in our command line, I'm going to clear out some of these windows that are here. I'm going to paste in that command that we saw a little while ago. Now, for me, I'm going to remove that version because I think that version might be a little bit older than the more current one. So I'm just going to do .NET add package, Microsoft Entity Framework in memory. Now, the in memory part is important because that means that you can kind of go through this exercise, use Entity Framework without actually having to set up a database. So everything that's going to happen is going to happen in memory, and you're not going to have to worry about like installing something and figuring out what the connection string is and doing all of that type of stuff, right? So again, for the sake of the demo, it makes it easier. Please do not use this in production. Remember, I told you, okay? Do not use this in production. That is not what this is for. This is for testing and demos. All right. All right. So now that that's added, right, you should see that inside of our CS proj file. And now it wants us to add two files. It wants us to add a Contoso Pets context file, and it also wants us to add a seed data file. So why don't we look at the context file first and see what's in here? Now copy that too. Now, whenever we're working with Entity Framework, we use something called a DB context. And essentially, that's the type that manages our connection to the data. In that case, like our connection is really just working with something in memory. But again, imagine you're using something like SQL Server or Azure SQL or MySQL or MariaDB or something like that. Like that DB connection, right? That DB context is going to be able to manage that for us. So I'm going to copy that. And what I will do is I'll just create that class. What was it called again? It was called Contoso Pets context, right? So I'm going to right click here, add class. I'm going to type Contoso Pets context. And then it's going to create that thing for me. And now I'm going to just paste that in there. Let me minimize this window too. It's a little bit in the way, right? So you can see for our DB context, we define like a constructor here for it, but we're also defining products. And the products here essentially represents like a table or a collection, right? For where our data is going to live. And as you can imagine, if we had more than just products, let's say we had products, let's say we had, inventory and shipping and other stuff, right? Like we can have those different tables represented as properties inside of Entity Framework. All right, let's keep going. Hey, the next thing I think we need to do is, let's scroll down. All right, so it wants us to add this thing, added context to our configure services method. All right, and now this configure services method lives in startup.cs. So let's see how we can do that. I'm going to do Control P. Control P is one of my favorite commands. It pretty much allows us to open up the command palette inside of VS Code, and then kind of move around and do stuff. If you're on a Mac, it's Command P, but if you're on Windows and Linux, it's Control P. So anyway, I'm opening that up, and I want to look for a startup.cs. And notice it shows it to me there, and we got it open. All right. And what I went ahead and did was we had to find that method called configure services. And now we have to add that code to it. And I think I copied it, right? Actually, I'm just going to copy this part because I think it might copy like the whole thing. And I don't want it to do that. Now, let's talk about what configure services does for us for a second. Let me format this, move this around. Looks like this thing is mad at me. I'm going to add these using statements, and then we'll get to it in a second.
What did you do, Cecil?
I did something bad. Am I in trouble? What happened?
No, I was just making sure. So
Okay.
you just copied this over directly from the Learn module over into here?
Yeah, so this part that's highlighted. I took this highlighted part and I added it to this configure services method. Now, what does this configure services method do? Within the context of ASP.NET Core, this essentially is where we set up our services, right? We set up what's called dependency injection. And essentially it allows us to make a lot of these different things that we want to use inside of our application available to other parts of our code. I like to think about dependency injection as like a developer shopping list, right? So imagine like you need to go to the store, you write down your shopping list, right? And your shopping list is, these are the things that I need. You know what I mean? I need water, I need eggs, I need, quinoa and coconut water or whatever the case is, right? And then you take your shopping list and that shopping list is attached to you, right? These are the things that I need. And now something is going to provide you that stuff. You know what I mean? Something is going to go out and get it for you. So that might be, DoorDash or Instacart or your mom, right? Like you give them your shopping list. Here, could you please give me these things? That's very much like dependency injection in your code. So in our code, our classes could say, hey, I need a database. I need access to configuration. I need these things. Could you please give them to me? And this method here configures the provider, the things that's going to return it to you. So you could start consuming it in different parts of your code. Hopefully that makes sense to folks. And we'll see how we navigate through that in a little bit. All right, so we registered our DB context. And I think the next thing we need to do, it wants us to create this seed data class. And I think this job of the seed data class, if I'm not mistaken, is to create like some dummy data, right? Some fake data that we're going to use inside of our app. So I'll go ahead and copy this and we'll create that seed data thing, right? So I'm going to hit add. Nope, sorry, did it wrong again. Right click, add new class. I'm going to call this seed data, right? And then I'll just paste that in here, right? So I just, again, copy pasted the stuff that we had in the module. Now, what you'll see inside of seed data is that there's a method on line 8 called initialize. And initialize takes that DB context that we have. It makes sure that our database is empty. In this case, our in-memory database is empty. And it just adds some stuff to it, right? So you can see here, it adds 2 products. There's a squeaky bone product, and then there's a knitted robe product. Okay, all right. So now we've added database support, and we've added some fake data that we can start using inside of our database. All right, let's keep going. Let's keep going. I think the next thing we're going to have to do is, okay, here it is. Now we have to go to the program.cs file. Now, if you remember inside of VS Code, we had startup.cs and program.cs. Now, the job of program.cs is, well, that's pretty much like the entry point, right? That's where our application is going to start. So that's where, whenever we do a .NET run, it's going to be like, oh, okay, well, here's our application. This is the web server. Like, I'm going to start it up for you, and you could start, using and making requests to it. And so you can see inside of here, what it's doing is it's adding this code is here at the bottom, right? To pretty much create like that database seed, right? So essentially it's gonna, as we start up the application, it's just gonna go ahead and boot up that database and also add that data to our in-memory store. So I'll just copy this like I did before. I'm gonna head over to program.cs and we're gonna paste this in again. I feel like I'm a glorified copy paster today, but hopefully you'll see like this is what it actually feels like when you go through these Learn modules. So the exact code that I have here is the same code that we got from that Learn module. Let's see, what else do we got to do? Let's scroll down a little bit. Right. Now it wants us to build it, and and then we can move forward to the next module. So let's go ahead and do that. The next part is talking about adding a controller. Okay. Now, before we add the controller, let's talk about what a controller is. Now, controllers are like an artifact from MVC, right? MVC being Model View Controller, which ASP.NET Core has a lot of great support for. But when it comes to web APIs, controllers are essentially the mechanism that we use or one of the mechanisms that we could use to accept requests and return responses, right? And again, we go back to thinking about, web APIs allow us to carry out operations. We send a request to do this operation, and then the server returns the response. So that part that's in the middle, like what is the work that's actually going to have to happen? That's essentially what happens inside of our controller. So now we're going to create a new controller that's going to be able to handle us working with these products. So you can see here, we're going to add a products controller. So it says just add an empty class products controller. And then, oh, look, I have more code to copy. So now we're going to copy a whole bunch of code here. Right? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to copy this. I hope you all are still following along with me. I'm going to go to the controllers folder because this is where I want to put my controllers, right? You don't have to, but it's just a good idea to kind of have things in the same place sometimes. I'm going to call this products controller. And now inside of here, I'll just paste in that stuff, right? Now, why is this thing red? Oh, because I didn't paste it right. Let's try that again. There we go, right? And so now we have this controller that's going to be able to receive requests and return these responses. Now, let's take a look through the code and see what it actually does. It's not always good to like just blindly copy and paste code from the internet inside of your project. Now, our controllers inherit from this thing called controller base, right? Inheriting from controller base kind of gives us a lot of extra methods that we could use that just make development of APIs a little bit easier. Here on line 17, you can see that we have a constructor. Our constructor, again, is the thing that kind of sets up our controller. Like, how do I initialize it? How do I tell you, how do I create a new controller, right? And notice how we're accepting a Contoso pets context. And that pets context is the one that we created whenever we set up that in-memory database. But how is exactly is it going to receive this? Like, we're not going to create it. ASP.NET is going to create it. And like I told you before, this is like the controller shopping list, right? It says, hey, I need this thing. And, ASP.NET is going to be like the good little citizen that's going to go find out how to create a context and provide that to the products controller. And then the last piece we have down here on line 23 is an action method. Now, our action methods are actually responsible for doing the work that it takes to process that request. So the controller receives the request, hands it off to an action method, it processes the request and sends it back over. Now, you can obviously have more than one action method inside of your controller. So now the question is probably, well, how do I know which action method I'm going to pick? And that goes back to those HTTP requests and response methods that we spoke about a little bit earlier, right? So notice this one is annotated with HTTP GET. So if I make an HTTP GET request, over to the API controller for products, then it's going to issue, it's going to fork out to this one that says get all. Or if I had one that was a post or a put or delete, it would call that associated action method to invoke that method to carry out, processing that request and generating the response back. Okay. All right. Let's head back over. All right. So
before we kind of keep going, just because we're all following you along on our Learn modules here, I just want to make sure that we're not going too fast for anybody. People can kind of catch up. But also I have a couple questions for you that kind of relative to the what you're just discussing. Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions right now?
Yeah, please.
Cool. So we are taking questions in the chat. I'm taking them as I'm getting them in. So apologize if this is a little bit backdated, but yeah. So yeah, Miguel asks, how easy is it to add Swagger to a web API built using .NET Core 3.0 or a previous version?
It's not hard at all. And usually what I tell folks to do, the Swagger folks have, or the Swashbuckle folks have a really good set of documentation that we could use, right? So if you head over to GitHub, this is where you can use, you can check out the Swashbuckle stuff on GitHub. It's github.com/domain-driven-dev/swashbuckle.asp.NET Core. They have a lot of great documentation here that you could take a look through that'll show you how to get started. So usually it starts off with just installing a NuGet package, which again would be this swashbuckle.asp.NET Core. And then, it'll show you like some of these additional methods that you need to have. So here you notice in the configure methods or the configure services section that we spoke about a little while ago, you can see that there's there's an add Swagger gen, right? And literally, I'll be real with you. Like I come in here and I copy and paste these samples into my code and, they kind of just work. So that's one thing that you'll do. And again, as you scroll down, you'll see, you also have to make this call here to use Swagger as well. And, that's the thing that would actually generate the documents that we could use to test out our APIs. Whenever we run our API again, I'll show you exactly what that document looks like, because I think it's an important thing for folks to understand exists and also to like the purpose that it serves. But yeah, to answer the question, that's not hard at all. As you can see here, like this is pretty much it, right? Now, another thing that you might want to do is, by default, like the UI doesn't have everything, or the Swagger UI doesn't have all the information about your API. And that's when we start talking about like, how can we go in and start customizing different aspects of it? Like maybe I want to customize the different response codes that I can return, or I want to customize like the different media types that it supports, or I want to customize the different routes that I can send messages to. Then again, the documentation is usually pretty detailed. You can start digging through that stuff and see how exactly you can do that. But no, it's not tremendously hard at all. And I believe Swashbuckle, this one does support 3.1. It supports 5.0. I don't know if it supports 2.2, but you shouldn't be using 2.2 anyway because it's out of support.
Yeah, that was a bit outdated. Okay, so what is the benefit of using Swashbuckle over NSWAG?
What's the benefit of using Swashbuckle over NSWAG? I would say, they're both pretty good. I think Swashbuckle has been around a little bit longer, and so I think it's just like the more popular one that a lot of folks use. I think it really just boils down to a matter of taste, right? Like what API do you prefer to use for this or the other? But NSWAG is just another option in addition to Swashbuckle that will allow you to generate like a Swagger UI and an Open API doc. We haven't really spoken about Open API, but when I go into the Swagger UI again, we'll talk about it. It's really just another option for you to do that. And another thing I really like about the NSWAG stuff as well is that it also has support for like generating clients. So what is a client, right? I have a web API. But my web API exists on the server, and now I want to be able to make requests to that server, right? I want to be able to say, hey, give me the products, or add a product, or give me some information, or let me buy it, right? I want to do stuff. But how do I actually make those requests? Well, we make those over HTTP. Now, there does exist a space where, hey, I don't really want to write all that HTTP code myself. And so we rely on client SDKs to do that for us. With NSWAG, I believe, they have like a CLI tool and some generation tools that you could point to your Swagger doc, right, or your Open API doc that you get, generated, and it will look at it and see all the operations that are available in your API, and it'll generate those clients for you. And one of the things I like about it too is that it not only does .NET, but it does, you can get them generated in tons of other languages as well. So Python, Node, Java, JavaScript, all kinds of stuff. So
awesome. Thank you.
yeah, sure.
Couple other questions here before we move on.
Sure,
So Kushal wants to know, what is the best way to filter data in a database side or in the API code?
What's the best way to filter database calls using an API? Yeah, I think it depends. That's a hard question. The best way is best depending on your use case, right? Like what types of options do you want to have available to the callers of your API? For instance, you might think of, hey, well, my data looks a certain way. Maybe I only want to have certain records available to them, or maybe I only want to have certain properties of those records available to them. Maybe I want to have some records available to some and some not to others. And so now there's a whole security thing that we have to think about, right? How do I create partitions or sections of that stuff? Yeah, honestly, I think it depends. I also think it depends as well on what are you storing your data in. Are you using a SQL? Are you using NoSQL? Is it coming from a different place? So yeah, I wish I could give you a more specific answer, but honestly, it just depends. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on where your data is. It depends on what type of querying concerns that you have. Yeah, it just depends.
Okay, sure. Well, let's go ahead and keep going, and I'll save a few questions for you for later.
Sure, no problem. And again, just as always, for folks that are in the chat, feel free to go ahead and keep asking your questions. I'll stop at any moment in time and answer them for you. Also, if I'm going too fast and there's anything you want me to, hit pause and go back over, totally fine. Let me know, because, this is, we're doing this for y'all, and we want to make sure that you understand everything that we're trying to show you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll also take some time at the end to make sure that we answer all of the questions that come through as well.
Right. All right. So we added the controller. I think after we add this control, yeah. All right. So we got to build and run it. All right. So let's spend some time now talking about that Swagger UI I mentioned before, right? So I've added all the code from that page. I'm going to go back into my command terminal, and I can do .NET run to run it. Now, I want to show you another option that we have available as well. If you're using VS Code, which I'm assuming all of you are, on the right side in the menu, in the navigation menu here, there's like a little thing that has a bug on it. And this is actually our debug view. And using the debug view, you might have seen like a little pop-up that might have said, hey, do you want me to add assets to make this thing debuggable, blah, 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 blah. And I hit yes. What it would do is it would generate the tooling that's needed inside of VS Code to allow me to just debug this using, using Visual Studio Code. So what I want to show you is I'm going to put a breakpoint here, right? And a breakpoint, for those of you that may not be familiar, is just a way for me to say, I want you to run this code, but when you get here, I want you to stop, right? I want you to stop. I want you to pause, and then give me a chance to like inspect what's actually happening. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. So like I said before, it's going to go and get our source code. It's going to build it. If there was a problem, it would yell at me and be like, oh, you did something silly, Cecil. So we're not going to actually make this happen. And then it's going to boot up that web server, and we're going to start doing stuff. All right, so our web server is up and running. I'm going to go ahead and copy that URL again. And I'm going to head back over to my browser. I'm going to put in the URL that it's hosted at. And I know what it's hosted at because it says this here at the bottom inside of the logs. That might be a little hard for you to see, but it's down there. And then I'm going to do /swagger, right? And again, remember, I can do /swagger because out of the box, inside of .NET 5, the Web API templates do have the Swagger support, in there by default. All right, so if you recall, we did add that additional controller called the products controller. And notice how we now have this additional products endpoint here, right? So that means that now we could start making requests to this product endpoint. So if I click on this, now our Swagger UI will allow us to do things like we can try it out. I can hit this execute button. And you remember, like I hit that breakpoint, right? The breakpoint was, hey, I'm running this code. When you get to this point, I want you to stop, right? So it stopped here. And what I'm expecting to happen is it's going to call our context. Remember, we went to the the supermarket and be like, hey, we need this context, right? Can I get this from our developer shopping list? And it brought that into me. So now I'm going to query that and tell it to give me all the products. Now, I just want to say, in general, you probably wouldn't do this. In general, you probably wouldn't say, give me my entire database. But we only have 2 items in here, and this is fine for demos. But like someone had asked a little bit earlier, you might want to use something like LINQ, or if you're using Mongo or Redis or something, you might want to use like the requisite querying facility that's in there to be able to return those results in a little bit more of a controlled manner. All right, so that returns, and after it returns, you should see our data is shown here, right? So the squeaky bone and also the knotted rope. All right, now your question is probably, Cecil, how in the world did it know about this stuff? Like, I don't understand this. Like we talked about it a little bit before, but I want to dive into it just a tad deeper. Like, let's go like one level deeper than we did prior. Now, out of the box, what the Swagger UI does, or what the Swashbuckle stuff does, is it adds something called an Open API document. And you notice here, we'll have the name of our API, but right under it is this link that we can click on. And if I click on this link, again, it'll open it in my, this little thing I got here, but it'll open up a document, and inside of it, it'll tell us about different things about our API. So, here I can get some basic information, like here's the title and the version, right? I can even add additional things in here, like maybe your API has a license and a terms of use and a company and whatever, right? Like I could start enhancing my API by adding some of these things. Also, notice here it has a path, right? Remember we talked about like URLs, right? And the last part of that URL being the path to the resource. How do I get to the thing that I actually want to use? And that's also described here in this JSON document. So notice we have /products, and we also have /weather forecast. If I open up the products one, this is my GET request. And then you can notice here that it returns a response, and then there's some tags here. It just tagged it as products. But essentially, excuse me, this is a JSON document that will let us know what are all of those different operations that are inside of our web API, what are the responses that it returns, and what are the types that it accepts, right? And so now we could use it, you could use it, the Swagger UI uses it to generate this UI that we have now to make use of to test our APIs. And kind of going back to that NSWAG thing that we spoke about a little earlier, using tools like NSWAG or Autorest, or we have a lot of options. We essentially point those tools to that JSON document, to that Open API specs document, and it'll look at all those operations, and that's what will generate those clients for us. So our .NET client, our C#, our C# clients, our Visual Basic, Python, Java, JavaScript, whatever. It could look at that in a very platform agnostic way and be like, okay, well, how do I create like things that could start using this API if I didn't just want to do like raw HTTP? Okay, so we got this here. I think we have a couple more that we're going to do. Like, I think we're going to add some additional methods onto here. So let's see how we can do those. Oops, wrong way. This way. This is the way we want to go. All right, so I'm going to stop my debugger really quickly. I don't want to keep that running. And let's close the Swagger UI. We'll close these. And let's see what else it wants us to do. Oh, here's 2 things that we didn't really talk about. So on top of our API controller, there's something in here called a route attribute. And then there's also something here called a controller attribute. And I think these are important to mention. So the route attribute essentially is what helps ASP.NET Core know, how do I get to the controller that's managing the thing, right? So right now we have 2 controllers. We have a products controller, and we also have that weather forecast controller, right? But they both have get methods. So how do I know which get method are you actually going to invoke? And this is where routing kind of comes into play, right? Routing allows us to take that shape of that URL and send it to a particular controller that's going to be responsible for managing it. And actually, let's play around with routing just a little bit so you all can understand what I'm talking about. Now, inside of this products controller, notice here at the top, I have a route attribute, right? And this actually is using a special syntax, but this is just saying, I want you to look at the name of the controller. That's why this controller token is here. And the name of my controller is products. So that would mean that if I make a call to slash products, I'm going to there we go. Right. If I make an API call to slash products, it's going to invoke this controller, right? Just like you can imagine if I was using the weather forecast controller, I'd have to make a call to slash weather forecast and it will invoke that controller. One of the things that you can do here as well is you could make this to be anything that you want it to be. So what if I wanted to change it, right? Instead of just going to products, I wanted to go to slash API slash products, right? Or what if I, wanted to go to slash API dot product info, right? Like you can change that to be whatever you want. Now, one of the benefits of, there's pros and cons of using the token versus just using a hard-coded value. One, if you have a hard-coded value, then, it'll pretty much be consistent. As you change the name of this controller and the name of other things that are inside of here, you know what I mean? You don't have to worry about changes of your code actually affecting the changes in your route. Or, again, you might want to use the token, right? And so I might want to put back a controller here. Right? And now this will make a call to, instead of just slash products, it'll be slash API slash products. Right? But if I change this to be like a category controller or an inventory controller or something else like that, then this last part of the path will change accordingly to be able to match that. So again, depending on what you want to do, you could do one or the other. So now that I've actually changed that, why don't we, let me prove it to you and show you that it's actually working. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run again. And now what I'm expecting, let's take this off. I don't want that there. I'm going to go ahead and run this again. And now you should see when we take a look at our Swagger UI, the actual path of our thing should have changed. And it's running. Okay. Boom. Let's open this up super quick. Right. And notice now the path has changed, right? Notice it's gone to now it's slash API slash products. So again, like based on however you want to control like the routes or the path for you to get to a particular resource, you have that ability using like those routing attributes that kind of come built in. Another thing that's in here that we do want to talk about is the API controller attribute. And what this does, it says here, it gives us some opinionated conventions, right, that we could use to, apply to our APIs by default without us really having to do some work with it. So, things like the way that binding happens inside of ASP.NET, the way that routing happens, the way that, response codes are returned, right? Like some of these things will kind of just be created for us by default. And if you wanted to, you can really dig into the docs. Like they have a very long list, well documented about all of the different conventions that that this thing applies for you. Right. And what else is in here? So yeah, we spoke about constructor injection. We spoke about that a little bit. We built and tested it and reran it, right? So again, we should have seen like all of those products that we had like returned from our API. Now, yeah, we saw this, we saw this, we saw this. All right, now let's take some time and talk about the CRUD operations. And actually what I want to do is I want to head over to the slides really quick and review some things for you, just so that we understand what's happening and also to kind of put some context around what we're doing. So like I said before, like whenever we make an HTTP request, essentially what's happening is that the browser or your client is generating some stuff that's going to go over to a server, and then that server is going to receive that request, process it, and then return a response. Now, this is what an HTTP request kind of looks like over the wire, right? On the top, we have something called like the request line, right? And the request line has things like the path. Remember, we saw the path. It has the HTTP verb, which could be put, post, delete, and it also has the version of HTTP that we're using, right? Then after that, we have a collection of key value pairs called headers. And headers inside a request are very similar to like metadata, right? It's just additional information that's important for the server or the thing that's processing that request to know about it. So for instance, you can see here we have like an accept type, like what's the type of information we accept. There's the content type, which tells us, well, what's the type of content that's actually in this request, right? We have the host where we're coming from, the user agent, and tons of other stuff. And now the last part about it that we want to talk about is the body. Now, the body of the request is essentially like the information that's contained inside of the request, right? Like some additional, whether it's products or resources that we want to create or whatever the case is. Now, the body is an optional section. And so depending on the type of HTTP verb that you're using, like it may or may not be there. But essentially, these are all the components that make up an HTTP request. Now, after the request is received, again, on the server side, it's going to get processed. Now the job of the server is to return a response. And the response codes or the response for an HTTP message looks very similar to a request. The main difference is that instead of having a request line, it has a status line. And the status line is important because it lets us know, well, what happened to that request we made? Was it successful? Did it fail? Was there a validation error? Did we have a connection error? Do we need to do a redirect? Whatever the case, like what happened to my request? And so that first line will give us that information, right? Again, the version of HTTP that we're using, it'll give us the status code, whether it's the 200 OK or whatever the case is. And then just like the request as well, it has key value pairs inside of HTTP headers that we could use. And it also has that optional response body. So you can imagine, let's say I made an HTTP request to say get products, then we'll get a response back that looks something like this. And then inside of the body, it'll have that representation of that resource. So what's the representation of those products or those recipes or those inventory items that we want? And in this case, you can see that we're using JSON to do that. Now, and we also spoke about these CRUD operations a little bit, but I wanted to give you, show you more of a, this diagram to kind of hopefully land it in a little bit harder, right? So again, you think about that we have those resources, right? We have, I guess in our case, we have products, and I might want to create products. I want to read products, update and delete. Excuse me. And, based on what we want to do, we're going to have those different HTTP methods that are associated with it. So again, if I want to create something, I'm going to use a post request. If I want to read something, I'm going to use a get request. If I want to update something, I could use put or patch. If I want to delete something, I use a delete request. And these are really just conventions that the industries have just accepted, right? Like these are things that, we generally do whenever we're creating web APIs. And on the server side, well, how does the server let you know when bad things have happened, right? And then that's where those response codes or those status codes come into play. So based on whether it's a success or a failure, I could use the successful codes, which are usually like the 200 level codes, or a failure code, which are usually like 400 or 500 level codes. So as an example here, you can see if I did a read request with a get, I might return a 200 level status code. If I couldn't find the resource that I was looking for, then I'd say it's a 404 not found. If I wanted to update something, I could update it and we could say, okay, well, it was, there's no content to return, but it was successful to return a 204. Or, maybe you told me to update something that didn't exist and I couldn't find it, so I returned a 404, right? But again, like these response codes let us know what exactly happened as we were sending these messages back and forth. Now, these are the general categories of status codes that we talk about, right? You usually don't see folks use like that 100 to 199 range very much, but they're there and they're available to you. But you can see that we have that 200 range, 200 to 299, which are represent successful status codes in HTTP. We have the 300 level codes that are usually for redirection. So that's like, say, hey, I hit a proxy, or I hit, maybe you changed your URL, or you changed like the domain name of something, and it says, hey, well, I used to be here, but I live here instead now, right? Like my address is different. Kind of like what you do with the post office when you have like your mail redirected. Then we have the 400 and 500 level errors. And the differences with these are with 400 errors, they're usually the fault of the client, like the fault of the entity that's generating that request. And with the 500 errors, it's usually the fault of the server, right? So again, like who's the blame, right? Like who are we pointing our fingers at? Is it the server's fault or is it the client's fault? And based on that, we will know, hopefully on our side, we can be a little bit resilient in how we respond to these things, right? Like, do I need to do a retry, or, do I need to, I don't know, maybe I need to reboot the server, or maybe I need to call someone to be like, hey, I'm really not sure what's going on here, but I think there's a problem. Could you take a look at this and fix it for us? And again, those are what those status codes are there for as well. One thing you could do too inside of your code, we haven't really shown it, but we probably could. One of those things that we could do with your status codes is you probably want to log them. So you probably have some type of, reporting system, management system, email alerting system to say, hey, when bad things happen, who do I let know about that? And so inside of your code, you could look for errors or you can capture them. And instead of giving your user, a lot of weird looking status codes and gobbledygook, and they're like, I don't know what this is. So like, I don't know why you're showing this to me. We could just say, hey, bad things happen, but we're looking into it. And then on our other side, we could start making, requests to the right people that are going to be able to deal with that. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't, and then we could, again, we could always roll it back. We could start talking about it.
Hey, Cecil, I have a question. Could you elaborate further on conflict return code?
On what? I'm sorry?
Conflict return code?
Okay, on conflict return. Sure. So if there's a conflict, so you can imagine, let's say, okay, Jamie, you have a product, right? And your product is called, I don't know, like you're making hats or something like that, right? And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a hat product too, right? So now one of us is going to win. Like someone's hat is going to get there first, right? The person that gets there last, your API could look at it and say, hey, well, this is a duplicate record, or this is something that, we already have, or a change was made to it. And so you don't have like the most up-to-date version or information about the thing that exists. So now I'm telling you, well, hey, there's a conflict here, and you probably need to either refresh the information that you have, or maybe change the request that you're trying to make. Again, it's kind of like, like both of us are trying to go into the door at the same time. You know what I mean? Only one person is going to be able to make it, and then someone's going to have to take a step back, re-establish themselves, and then they can go through the door. So that's kind of what the conflict return type is kind of there for, right? Like, hey, if bad things happen and we're not on the same page with that thing, again, maybe your data is old or it needs refreshed, or you got a bad, old cache or something like that. You can let them know, and then now that person, that client, could refresh that information and get the most up-to-date one. And yeah, if they still want to make a change or still want to make an update after that, then they can go ahead and do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Any more questions?
No, let's go ahead and keep going.
All right. So the next thing we want to take a look at is how we can implement these CRUD operations. So like I talked to you before, like CRUD stands for create, read, update, delete. And we just saw those a little bit in that last slide that I just showed you. And so when it comes to those CRUD operations, or particularly when it comes to those HTTP action verbs, we have associated attributes inside of ASP.NET Core that we could use. So you've already seen like the HTTP get attribute, but we have attributes for pretty much all of the verbs. So again, put, post, head, options, patch, and so on and so forth. So we're going to take a look and see how we can start to use some of these things. So let's take a look first at the retrieve product, right? Now, this one is going to pull up a product by ID. And what's special about this one is it's also going to be using a GET request, but the route is going to be a little bit different, right? So instead of it just being, /products, is going to be /products/ and then the ID of the thing that we want to retrieve. And you can see that because when you take a look on this attribute here, notice that it has this little token thing. We have two curly braces and ID in the middle. Well, that ID is going to be a part of the route, right? It's going to be a part of the path that we're going to make a request to when we want to get information back. Now, since we're using ASP.NET Core, our method, right, our action method is going to be able to receive that as a parameter. And then we can pass it into our database, and we could start to return the right response. So why don't we take a look and see how we did that? I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to stop that. Now let's go down a little bit. Oh, look, it even tell me where to put it. So I'm going to put it right here in the middle where it says get by ID. Right. So again, we have our get operation. Let's close that. right? We're going to use our DB context, which is in memory at this point, to pull out that item. Now, if the item is found, it'll just return it. And I believe it's just going to return an OK. But an OK being like a 200 level status code. And if it's not found, we're going to return not found, which I believe is a 404 status code. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try something different. I'm going to do, instead of like just stopping and running my thing all the time, which I'm sure might be getting a little annoying for some of you, I want to try a new command. I'm going to do .NET watch run. Now, what does .NET watch run do? What it does is it'll watch my code, hence the watch, and every time my code changes, it'll run the run command, right? It'll execute that run command. And so this is almost like a way that I don't have to keep starting and stopping the debugger all the time, because you're probably like, oh, so how many times you got to do this, right? So I'm going to try this out. Let's see if it works for us. So I got my .NET watch run started. Oh, I have an error. What's the problem? Did I break something? What's the problem? No. Okay, let's do this. I'm going to do a .NET clean. What .NET clean is going to do is it's going to clean my build. Like, so anything that it might have created before, it's just going to wipe it out. Now let's try this again. .NET watch run. And is it going to work this time? Let's cross our fingers and see what happens. Please work. Great, now it's working. Fantastic. So now this is running. Notice that I have that second operation added to my API, right? So under products, I have not just /API/products, but I have /API/product/ID. Okay. So when I open it in the Swag UI, notice how it now gives me the option to add an ID to the request. And what it'll do is it'll just substitute ID into this little token that's here. You can notice that inside of the path, right? So if I try it out for myself, I actually don't know what the IDs of these things are. What are the IDs for this thing? Let me let's do this. Let's look in the, I think it's in seed. All right, so I have, oh, that doesn't make sense. Let's do that. 1. There we go. So now we have one with an ID of 0 and one with an ID of 1, right? So based on what we're doing, I should be able to pull back one of these things, okay? And let's go ahead and run that. So we're going to try it out. I'm going to put 1 in here, and now I'm going to execute it. And what did I get back? ID 0, string price 0. Did I do that right? What's happening here? Find async. Okay.
Hey, so can you elaborate on what you're doing here?
Sure. So what I'm doing here, so I executed this get by ID. I put the ID in here. And now what I'm expecting it to do is to pass that information into my DB context, and it should return a product for me. But this looks like it says type error failed to fetch. Why did it fail to fetch? So I need to figure out, why did it not find it? Find async. All right, this is what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to change the query. Let's see if this works, folks. I'm going to use link instead. I'm going to say where. I'll tell y'all what I'm doing in a second. I'm going to use a different querying syntax. I'm going to say where p dot ID equal to the ID. Right, and then I'm going to do, actually I'll do this one, single or default. Great, there we go. All right, so what do I do? Why did I change this? Why is this mad at me? This is mad because it's saying, single or default, okay, Product does not contain definition for get awaiter. Does it not? Let me see. Oh, okay, got it. Single or default. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to return the ID, Now, I think what happened for some reason, that method that was there before, which was find async, wasn't probably taking that ID and querying the right property. Now, what property should it be querying? Inside of here, notice we have an ID property, we have a name property, we have a price property, right? So what I decided to do was, hey, let's change the query a little bit. And so I'm changing the query to say, hey, I want you to look at products, and I want you to look for a product where the ID is equal to this ID parameter. And this ID is coming from that request that we accepted a little while ago. And this singular default is saying, hey, there should only be one thing in here that has an ID that matches this thing, right? And so if you find it, return it to me, or if not, it's going to return the default, and the default is none. Now, another option would be if I just did single, but if I did single and it didn't find it, then I get in trouble, because then it throw an exception, and then we'll have a whole, not happy situation. We don't want that to happen, right? So I'm going to try this now and see if this works instead. And I think that waiting for file to change. If I save this, right, I saved it now. It's going to restart because I'm doing .NET Watch. I'm still getting an error code. What's the problem with this thing? I'm going to stop using .NET Watch. I don't think it likes me today. I'm just going to run this the regular way. I'm going to hit this debug window, just like we were doing before. We're no longer running it in the command line. And hopefully this is going to build it. Okay, that looks good.
We have a suggestion from Nicholas. Maybe you need to reseed the DB.
Maybe I do need to reseed the DB. Let's do that. Okay, I'm going to delete a bunch of stuff. I'm wondering why is that happening. You're right. I probably do need to reseed the database. I'm going to delete some things from my folder. I'm going to look at this database again. I'll make sure the IDs are unique. The names are unique. Okay, that makes sense. And then let's go and take a look at the product. Now, if I look at how it's defined inside of here, I believe it was defined in a previous, was it the one before? It was defined in add a data store. I think what might be happening, I think I might have to label this as an ID. I think that might be what's missing from here. So let's try that and see if that fixes it, I believe. I haven't used Entity Framework in a while, so I'm going to guess that this is what we need to do. I think I could say this is a key. Now, what does the key do? The key says, well, this is the primary key, right? So I'm going to label this as the primary key. Okay, that's fine. The database should be wiped out. Okay, just thinking about this. Labeled as a primary key, database should be wiped out. We should be good now, I hope. Let's cross our fingers and see if this works out. We should be good. Do you trust me, Jamie? Do you believe in me?
I have all the faith in the world in you, Cecil.
That's what I need. That's what I need to make this thing work.
It's looking good.
Oh, still, internet neighborhood cannot be tracked. Another instance with ID is already being tracked. Where is it? Another instance product type cannot be tracked because another instance with this key value of ID is already being tracked.
You didn't delete the database, did you?
Well, I mean, it's all in memory. There's no database to delete. Is there? Where'd it go? Let's see. How can I delete this database? .NET clean. Should be empty. There's nothing. It should be nothing in here. The ID numbers are different. I didn't add any databases. There's nothing in. There's nothing on disk that says otherwise. There isn't. No. Okay. You know what? Let's try this. I'm going to go into the where we created it in the startup.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to call this Contoso Pets 2. Let's try this. We're going to try a bunch of stuff and see what happens. So I changed the database to in-memory Contoso Pets 2. I added a key here. And because the error that I was getting was it says that I already have a thing that exists with the same name. And folks in the chat, let me know if you think you know what the problem is. Let me know and we can talk about it. Right? So I changed the database it's using. This is weird. The instance of entity type product cannot be tracked because another instance with the same key value is already being tracked. That's weird.
What if you leave the IDE values as they were?
Well, they were both 0. They were 0, 0, right? Whenever we added them. Let's go down. Let's see.
Yeah, so we did change it to 1 and 0.
Yeah, they were two. See, they were both 0, 0. So what if I change
these? Just putting 2 and 3 and see if it's in memory.
Okay, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's do 3 and 4. All right, we're going to save it now. And let's try it again. That is weird. I wonder if it's happening because I'm using the records. Do you think it could be a records problem? What if I stop using records? Oh, it's running. I changed it to 2 and 3. Okay. All right. I don't know where that database is because I thought it was in memory. But we could talk about that later. So this is up and running now.
Yeah.
Let's head back to the Swagger UI. Okay. Now I have my breakpoints in the products controller. So I'm expecting this to stop there. And I know I only have 3 and 4. So if I did try out 1, boom, right? And let's step through with the debugger really quickly. I should return a not found, right? Because I don't have any products with the ID of 1 anymore, right? So I'll run that and I should return a, not found, right? That's expected. That's what it's supposed to do. If I did a 3 and I executed this and I ran through the debugger, it should return the product. And I should have something like, right. So it returns a product. I get a 200 level status code. So there you go. So now it's fixed and it's working and there we go. So good. So we kind of sorted through that in-memory issue. Our database is
together. Everybody online, you're all so smart. You helped us figure it out.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Because I was like, what in the world is happening here? All right. So anyway, so now you saw how we could do that additional route. But the important part is, again, we have that additional endpoint that we're going at, /API/products, and we get the individual products by using the ID inside of the route. All right, great. Now let's head back here. We were in the section that was talking about, I think there's a little drop down here. We're in the section that's talking about implementing CRUD operations. So let's go back there, right? So we just did the retrieve a product and just retrieve an individual product. Let's see if let's do an add products one really quickly, right? So this one, what's different about this one is that it's using an HTTP post versus an HTTP GET. And so it's going to go ahead and add an additional thing to, our product. So I'm going to stop the debugger. Let's add the post action, copy paste post. And now we should have something that's going to give us the ability to add products to the database. Okay. I believe they're going to give us a sample, are they? No, they don't give us a sample of how to do it. But, even though they don't, we have the Swagger UI, right? And this is going to be another big benefit of using the Swagger UI, because since it knows the shape of the thing, like it should be able to give us an example of what we should actually put in to have our information returned. Okay, so I'm going to refresh the Swagger UI really quickly. We should have a post operation, right? And notice that it gives me an example, right? This is what is expecting it to look like, right? So I should have an ID, I should give it a name, and I should also give it a price. So let's go ahead and try it out. Boom. Now I just have to replace these values. I'm going to use a big value, like 230, right? So definitely not going to conflict with that. We're going to call it, I don't know, let's just call it hats, right? We can call this whatever. And after that, we'll say these cost, I don't know, Jamie, how much the hats cost, man? I haven't bought a hat in a long time. $20, I guess, is what hats cost. I don't know. And now we're going to execute this, right? But let's go ahead and set the breakpoint. I like showing you all what happens when you set the breakpoints. So I'm going to run this. Hopefully, it should hit my action method. Now, because this is a post method, and because we specified the thing we want to create inside of the body of the request, ASP.NET Core is going to allow us to specify a parameter that has the shape of the thing that we want. In this case, it's a product. And we're going to be able to specify that as a parameter, right? So again, it's taking that HTTP request, it's taking the body, and it's turning that into an object that we could use inside of our API, right? And generally, that's what we call like model binding inside of ASP.NET Core. Another thing that we may or may not have noticed is that, you know, if you recall, we did have these attributes on here, right? And so the fact that it got this far inside of our controller means that our validation was successful. And the next time I run it, I'm going to show you what happens when the validation fails. But so far, our validation has been successful. I'm going to go ahead and run this, right? Boom. I should have a 201, right? So that's good. 201 means created. And here's the thing that we just added to our database. Now, if I scroll back up and I head over to just the get products one and I execute that, I should be able to see, oh, I still have this breakpoint here. I can take that out. I should be able to see the one that we just created. And notice we were returning it right here, right? So we created it. It was added to our in-memory database. And notice it has like this unique ID that's in there as well. All right. Now, what would happen if I sent in an invalid request? What if I sent in a request and the body wasn't what we expected it to be? So I'm going to remove hats or remove this name property, right? I'm also going to set the price to like -1, right? It's still an integer. It's a valid .NET integer, but it's just not valid based on those attributes that we put on top of those methods. So I'm going to hit execute now. And notice it didn't hit my breakpoint. My breakpoint is still set. It didn't hit my breakpoint. So it didn't even really execute my action method, but it did return a 400 bad request. And notice, and again, this is doing this by default, right? And notice that it's giving me some information about things that I should things that we should correct. So notice it says like the name field is required, right? It also says the price field must be between 1 cent and like, you know, this amount of money that's here, right? So again, that's validation that's just in there by default and it's kicking in for us. Now, you know, the client or the thing that's looking at it can correct it and be like, okay, well, maybe I'll set the price, right? I'm going to fix the price and, you know, that should be fine. But even though we fixed the price, I'm still missing that name property. I still need to put something in there. And so I'm still getting that 400 level status code. I remember 400 means like it's a problem with me, not a problem with the server. So we're the ones that have to adjust a little bit and do something different. Let's call this, let's change the ID. Let's call this 100, right? And let's call this.
So I don't want to rush you, but I do want to make sure that we have time for questions, and we are at 5 minutes left, so we have a lot to cover.
Are we already?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm going to run this. We're going to do it quick. Boom. Look, we're going to add the thing. It's working. And now after we run this, we should have, if I execute this, we should have that. We should have shoes that cost like $20 that are inside of our product inventory. So that's great. All right. Now, since we only have a few minutes left, you can run through some of these other examples that are in here as well. You could definitely tell you to check out the modify one, which is an important one to look at, and also the delete one. But you will notice that they all pretty much follow a very similar convention, right? I'm going to create an attribute. I'm going to give it a, whether put, post, delete, depending on the HTTP method I want to use. I'm going to create a method around it, and then I'm going to carry out the work that I need to do. In this case, like we're working a lot with databases. In your case, you may or may not need to work with a database. Maybe you make another HTTP call, or maybe you get information from a file on disk. And then after you've gotten your information back for your resource, then you might decide, well, what's the right status code that I need to use to actually return to the client that, well, this is really what we want to do, right? So was it a no content? Was it a level 200 okay? Was it a bad request? Was it a not found request? And so on and so forth. Okay. Now, yeah, so I guess we can skip through these things. What we're going to do now I'm gonna move to the last part, and we gotta test Jamie again before we leave. So Jamie, I need you to come back because you need to get tested. And this time, this is the real test though. This is a serious test. So I hope you're ready.
I am. This is also a real test on the Learn module. So if you're actually following along on the Learn module, please feel free to put the answers in the comments, see if you can beat me. Okay.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay.
All right. So suppose you need to update a product's name. What HTTP action verb is the best fit for this request? Is it post, put, or delete? This is a hard one.
This is a hard one.
Post, put, or delete?
I'm going to say post,
Posts.
but now I'm not
Okay.
sure.
All right. And the next one is, suppose you have successfully created a product via the post verb. The response contains a location header. What's the purpose of the location header? We didn't really talk about that, but I'll let you guess what it does.
Okay.
So if you created something, right? So you created a new resource. Let's think about it. You created a new resource and it says it was successfully created and you got the location, right? What do you think the purpose of the location is? And the first option is to identify the location of the new resource that was created, but to provide a client with the URL for the post action, or to identify an existing product with the same name. So what do you think location for a newly created resource would be?
I want to say to provide the client with a URL for the post action, but I'm also torn between identity of the location for the new resource that was just created.
Okay, I'm going to help you. I'm going to read a part of the question that's important. I'll help you a little bit. It says you've successfully created a product via the post verb. So you've already run posts, and the post is returning a response that has in the location, right? So is it the location of the new resource? Is it the URL for the post action that you already just ran? Or is it the identity of an existing resource inside of, using the same name?
So A.
Are you sure? Is this your final answer?
But I'm going with A. Yes, that's what I feel most
I hope you're not cheating and like looking up stuff on like another
I'm not.
All right. In which scenario is it most appropriate to return an HTTP 400 status code? And how is it accomplished in ASP.NET Core? So I'm going to read it again. In which scenario is it most appropriate to return a 404 status code? How, excuse me, and how is it accomplished in ASP.NET Core? Now, first option is the product was successfully updated in the database. Call the bad request method to generate a 404. When model validation fails because the action required parameters are missing, call bad request method to generate a 404.
I'm gonna
Or
say
it says when you've requested a product by ID and it doesn't match the existing, it doesn't exist in the underlying data store, call the not found method to generate a 404. This one is probably a little hard. I'm not going to help you though, but it's a little hard.
I'm gonna say not found.
The last one?
Yeah, C.
Okay. So when we take multiple choice tests, I always tell people, make sure you look over your work. Are you sure that these are the answers that you want to submit?
Best I can do.
All right, we're gonna do it. We're gonna check it, and got them all right. That's awesome.
Amazing.
Congratulations, Jamie. You have passed the Let's Learn
I
.NET
learned
Web
This is
test today.
amazing.
You've gotten all of your answers correct. So we're gonna make sure that John gives you like a really cool prize. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And so after this, we just have the summary. And so in the summary, you can kind of go through here, and this will give you links to a lot of great resources that we have available for you. If you have not already, I definitely recommend you check out some of our series that we have on Channel 9. Because you can see here, we have one .NET Core 101 that really walks you through some of the fundamental things you need to understand about what is .NET Core, what can I do with it, what can I build with it, what is it all about. There's ASP.NET Core 101. This is actually would have been a good course for you to go through before you came to this one, because this kind of gives you, again, some of those fundamentals that you needed to do or to understand as before you start building web API. So if some of the things that you saw today were a little bit confusing still, definitely recommend you go ahead and check that one out. And Jamie, I think we have a course that's coming up, don't we?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we have an official Web API 101 course that's actually launching next week that Cecil here has made. It's a full walkthrough videos, only a few minutes long each, so it's really easy to consume, and that'll be launching next week. So if you want to take your Web API learning that you just learned today and kind of branch out and explore that, we highly suggest the Web API videos that will be on .net/videos, aka .ms.net/videos. That's where all of our beginner videos live and exist right now. So feel free to continue your exploring of your development process through here. Tons of amazing resources. Oop, there it goes. As well as if any of the resources you want to get from this event, go to aka.ms/web_API_resources. That will have everything you need for all of the events. Thank you. All of the stuff that we talked about here today. It has some amazing blog posts that we covered, as well as videos that you can watch to further your education. Everything you need is on there. And then we actually have another one of these events coming in March, on the 26th of March, and it is for microservices. So we hope to really see all of you all back here for that as well. And please let us know what you learned from this course and what you built with Web APIs. Feel free to share all of that stuff with us on Twitter with #letslearn.net. And we'd love to see what you've built over the last few weeks because of this.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of like what Jamie said, definitely let us know, what do you think about this? This is the first one of the Let's Learns that we've done. So we're kind of, we're going to look for your feedback and let us know, does this beginner format live questions and learn modules work for you? Is there some additional things that you'd like to see? Are there some additional topics you'd love for us to cover? I'm looking in the chat and I'm seeing some folks ask about like GraphQL and HTTP client and tons of other stuff. So again, like if you want to see more stuff, or if you want to see less stuff, let us know, and we could try and work it out. Also, there were some folks that have been asking for links. If you head to the page, so the page for this session that we're having right now, if you go all the way down to the bottom, underneath the agenda, there's a section called resources. And if you click on that link, you'll see, a link of links, right? Like here are all of the various links that you might be interested in. Things that we covered, links to docs, links to downloads, links to tools that you might be interested in, links to some really cool blog posts as well that talk about building web APIs with ASP.NET Core. So again, I know y'all want the links and you want the code and you want all the things, they're already here inside of that link that's inside of this page. So go ahead and check it out.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who joined us on the call. We really appreciate you. Thank you, Cecil. Thank you, our producers. If you have any questions or would like to get a hold of us, our Twitter handles are beneath our names. Feel free to contact us with any questions or concerns. We're happy to help you and walk you through your developer journey. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.